You know, memories are an interesting thing. When I first started with SIM, I was privileged to be part of let's see if this works. There we go. All right. You press enough buttons and it'll work. When I first started with SIM, I had the privilege of being part of a leadership development program for new country leaders, where they partner you with a more seasoned leader with SIM. And this was incredibly valuable for me because I came into SIM brand new. I didn't have a long history with SIM. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know what went before me. I didn't understand how the organization worked. And so this was instrumental in me understanding how to step into the director role and how to do that well. I was fortunate to be partnered with a gentleman, Jim Pluterman. Jim was one of our international directors years back. And in that time, in those first couple of years, I actually had the privilege of going and visiting Jim in Florida. And now Jim's in his 80s right now. Remarkable, spry, young 80 gentleman. And he would share what it was like with him when he was leading. When I visited him, he said, you know, there's someone that I want you to meet. I want you to meet Phil Parshall. Phil's a bit of a legend in SIM. In the 60s, he was in a Muslim country. He was the leader of the country. And in the 60s, he was starting to experiment of what it meant to be a Christ follower and yet also culturally Muslim. If you're familiar with what it means to follow Christ in a Muslim culture, you can be ostracized. You can give up everything in a decision to follow Christ. Your family no longer may see that you exist. And so Phil was wrestling, where is that boundary? What do you have to give up, and yet what can you hold on to? It was way before his time. When I was in seminary in the early 2000s, I remember classes in seminary starting to wrestle with the issues that Phil was wrestling with 40 years prior. Phil's amazing. He's written a number of books. And I remember we went out to this little cafe on a little country airport, and we're sitting, and Jim is helping Phil tell his stories. Now, this was bittersweet because Jim wanted me to meet him while Phil still had his memories. Phil and his wife had recently been diagnosed with the onset of dementia. And Jim respected him so much. He just felt, Rob, here's someone as a new director you need to know. You need to understand what the story of SIM, the type of people that it's involved. And I sat there and I heard from Phil when he could go ahead and he could grab those memories. But I also witnessed the pain when you could see the memory was just outside of his grasp. I think memories are something for us that we don't value enough until we realize we're at risk of losing them. Now we put things in our life that are designed to remind us of key moments that we don't want to forget. When I moved to New Zealand, I had no idea what lest we forget meant. I'm an American. I'm sorry. But you can't live here that long without being part of images like these. I think it was my second year that I thought, you know what, I really actually want to understand what it's like. And I'll get up early and I'll go join a few people down at the Auckland Domain, only to be down there with tens of thousands of people at dawn for a solemn service to remember what took place in World War I, to honor the sacrifice that people made. Culturally, we put things into our cultural practice that help us remember. We have personal things that help us remember. This might look just like a Kiwiana picture that someone might have on a wall. This hangs in our dining room. And you may just see a picture. When I look at this every morning when I wake up, when I make coffee, when we're having a meal, I remember back to 2012 when we actually thought that we were running out of provision to be able to stay here in New Zealand. We had been here for a year. We really believed that we were going to have to go home early. We thought we were going to stay for 2 years, not one. But we ran out of funding. And so our church actually went and they put together farewell gifts. And they gave us these farewell gifts earlier in the week to say, hey, we appreciate you being here. We want you to remember your season here. Within a week, we had a phone call that met our provision. And instead of having to go home, we were able to stay in New Zealand. We were able to continue the work that we felt God had us involved in that we weren't finished with yet. So I look at this is not just a picture to me. This is a reminder of God meeting a very real desire of my heart. And sometimes the things that we keep as memories to remind us of things are personal. Now, I normally keep this tucked under my shirt. And you might meet me, you might never know that I have this on. I was given a bone carving in 2004 when I first came here to New Zealand to help get a camp going on the North Island. And I think since that time, there are maybe 4 or 5 days that I haven't had this around my neck. Okay. What this reminds me of, I had been praying for years that God would give me a heart for a region of the globe. I didn't know what that was. I was a youth pastor. I just thought it was a place to take my kids on a missions trip. And 6 years later, I'm invited here to come help a church start a youth camp. I'm here, and while I'm here, I fall in love with New Zealand. I fall in love with how the church is engaging with culture. I get back on a plane, and I realize this is the answer to that prayer for 6 or 7 years. And I realize that at some point in time, God's going to have my family back in New Zealand. I don't know when, but I know what time. This may be a necklace or a bone carving to most, but for me, it's a reminder of God speaking to me and sharing future. In this passage that we have this morning, I think that is one of the messages that can come out of this. Now, I shared with the 915 group, I think I could come down here for a week of preaching and just stay in Joshua 3 and 4 and preach a different message out of Joshua 3 and 4. There's so much meat in these 2 chapters. And many of you know that I came down here to be a part, to work with the elders this week, and we've been doing some talk of just what is this next season of life like for the church as a family. So we've been looking to the future, and we've been wondering what's been going there. And as I've been prepping for this, and I've been looking at this passage, I kept being drawn to the reading that we had earlier. The 2 charges that Joshua gave the 12 representatives and then the people of Israel. I want to paint a bit of a picture of what was going on in that time. So in Joshua 3, it tells us that the people were camped on one side of the Jordan. Joshua had told them that God is going to do an amazing thing. They have wandered the desert for 40 years, knowing that a lack of faithfulness 40 years ago meant a challenging 40 years before they're back and given the opportunity to cross into this promised land once again. But there's a huge challenge standing right in front of them. Joshua 3 tells us that the Jordan River was at flood stage. Now, I've been down here when the Matara has been at flood stage. As a matter of fact, with the flood that was a couple of years ago that I think was the 500-year flood or the 100-year flood or whatnot, my son and I were trying to get down, and it felt like we were playing bumper cars on the road. We'd drive up to flooded road, we couldn't get through, we'd back up and would try another route trying to get into Gore. Rivers at flood stage are frightening. Anyone here a tramper and out tramping, and then you come back on a trail and you realize that the river's not what it was like when you left it? Okay. I'm a fly fisherman, and I like to fish. I'll step in the Matara River today, no problem, wade right out into the middle. But at flood stage, I wouldn't go in up to my ankles. Flooded rivers are dangerous. Flooded rivers take lives. Flooded rivers are not safe. And there's a flooded river in between the people of Israel and this new land, their new beginning. And yet we read in Joshua how God responds, how God makes a way for them to go. We hear how he stopped the Jordan. And he stopped it so suddenly. Joshua 3 tells us that as they're carrying the ark, the priests put their toe in the water, and the water's immediately blocked up and it's dry land. Now, I've seen waters rise and fall. We live near the beach up in Auckland. You see the tide come in and out. For a river to be blocked up, and for me to take one step and the water's blocked up, the next step, not in mud, next step I'm on dry land. We see God work in this incredibly miraculous way. So why do you think Joshua in 4 gives this command to the Israelites? Scripture tells us that they built the altar, and he says, we're building this, and in the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? I want you to go ahead and say, the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. I think it's important for us as Christ followers to build remembrance into our lives, because it's easy to forget when God was active and when God was real. We can be so focused on getting to the next place that we forget where we've been. We can be nervous about going to the place. We all come across new beginnings all the time. It's February. We've got, I'm sure, students here that are starting new schools. I know Alicia Barr, she's off starting university, another newness. Sometimes those newness bring excitement. Sometimes they bring anxiety, anticipation. Sometimes there's worry. Maybe it's a new illness or a new unexpected circumstance that you're dealing with. That newness can bring fear. And in that new space, we need courage. I think Joshua wants the people to remember, because he knows remembering what God has done in the past will help them step into this new opportunity that he has in front of them. Now, I also can't help but think that I'm sure people, the Israelites, thought like we do. And when I think of remembering, I don't always remember the things that are build up my faith. If I'm honest, I struggle with the things that hold back my faith. I remember my failures. I'm 55 years old this year. I can still remember being held in for recess in 3rd grade. I would have been 10 years old. Mrs. Darby's class. I can see Mrs. Darby. It was me and my friend James. We were both really good math students. Math was kind of my main subject. I'd always get 90s or 100s on our quizzes and tests. And Mrs. Darby held us in because she had just graded the latest quiz of the week. And James and I both got zeros. I was devastated. I was obviously a nerd, but like I couldn't believe that I got a 0 on an exam, and 45 years later, I can remember that like it was yesterday. My mind has a vice grip on that memory. That's not what Joshua's calling us to remember. Joshua's calling us to remember those times where God became real. I loved, you do something like this in worship and you hope that maybe 1 or 2 people show up. And I loved just the flood of people. And wasn't it a blessing to just hear those little mini testimonies of what this church community has done personally with people? I think those memories are important. I appreciate the prayer that you've had for the work that we've been doing with the elders. And I really firmly think that there's a new season ahead for Calvin. These last years have been tough. They've been difficult for a lot of churches. But as I go ahead and I speak and I preach, I hear this bubbling of excitement, this wonder, this hope in the church and what it would be. And as I've talked with the elders this week, I've heard that with your elders as well. I think it's important for Calvin to remember where you've been. How many people here have been at Calvin since it started? Anyone? No? How many people have been at Calvin for more than 40 years? So just look around, see the hands that are up. Okay. All right, how many people have been at Calvin for more than 25 years? Okay. How many people have been at Calvin for more than 10 years? How many people have been at Calvin for less than 5 years? Okay. You've got a wide variety of memory here. Just like I shared with the partials, there's always a risk of losing that institutional memory. We shared a little bit about what was here. As we've been preaching and as we were worshiping, can anyone think of significant seasons in the church? So not a personal thing. And I have some cheat sheet notes in case you can't think of them. But can anyone think of key seasons in this church where you say, you know what, that just seemed to be a season where God was really working, where we felt that either God allowed us to really reach out and meet a need in the community, or we saw tremendous growth within people and their maturity here at the church? Okay. If you can, just shout it out. Use your American outside voice. It'll make me feel welcome. And just go ahead and briefly shout out what the season was and why you thought it was important. Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. Okay. 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 Thank you.
When we came back from COVID, it was nice to be back in the church and see everybody.
Wasn't that awesome? When you finally come back and be a community, you didn't realize how much you enjoyed being together until someone told you couldn't? It's interesting that even in those hard seasons, you can find that that's when you really meet God. I had an uncle that told Danae and I once that God didn't create us for mountaintop experiences, He created us for valleys. And that's when He really engages us and does work with us. And my valleys tend to be those memorable moments too.
A couple of things. One is the expansion or the remodeling of our church buildings and the greater numbers, or bringing a lot more people together at the same time. But the other one is just the changes in pastors as well, bringing different aspects and different learnings and different style, all complementary, but at the right time, at the right person at the right time, I suppose.
Okay, all right. So that's that provision of lining up right people, right time for right season. Wow. Okay. I'm sure we could carry on, and I would go down as one of the preachers that went tremendously over time if we kept the conversation going. And so I don't want to stop this memory as an act of worship exercise. But I would like to encourage it, instead of sharing right now, maybe I give you a little homework in how to carry this on. So I'm a person that I know when someone says, hey, would you share? I'll just share off the top of my head, and that's fine. But I know everyone's not like that. Some people like to ponder. They like to think. If they're put on the spot, that just triggers anxiety. I can't share right now. And I suspect that just like we had a line of people here that were ready to share this morning on a moment's notice, we'll have people here that will go home this week and will think and ponder. And I would encourage you to just look at your schedule and to carve out some time, whether it's sitting in the park over by the river, or going for a walk. I like sitting by the park or walking by the river because you have all the river stones like what you have here. And be able to just sit and think of how God has used Calvin in this community to be his voice, his people, his family. How he's used this space to draw people into a relationship with him. Take some time pondering that. Hopefully this basket of stones will be up here. You can come up after the service. You can come up before the service next week. You can sneak in during the week. And if you've got something that you want to add to this pile, so as you come in and you see this pile, it's a memory for you, go for it. Maybe that's your step of homework. Or the other thing, you've got a tremendous opportunity today with the church picnic. But this opportunity extends week in and week out as well. And you saw just the range. I had you hold up hands to see how long people were here because I wanted you to start thinking of, oh, wow, I bet you they have a lot of stories. Or think of, oh, wow, I thought they might have known this or not. Maybe they don't know. And I'd encourage you to take that risk. Young people, like step out and talk to an old person. Yeah. What's that?
They don't.
They don't, and they can, but that's a scary place. I read somewhere, to just give you an idea, it's easier for a young person to develop a relationship with someone from an entirely different country that's their age group than to develop a relationship with someone from a different generation in their own country. Okay? So I know this is a real risk. I shared this message this morning at the 9:15, and I know the people that worship at 9:15, when we start this service, they'll sit out for a cup of tea and have a yarn right out here. I dare you, if you're not of that age generation, to show up 20 minutes early for church next week. Grab a cup of tea, sit down with them, and say, I'm really nervous, but Rob said I should come and listen to some of your stories. Will you tell me what Calvin means to you? And just see what they share. Or you could just hold up the church in prayer. You could do all three. I know the elders and your leaders are really trying to wrestle with what does this next season look like. And if the elders and leaders are wrestling with that, I'm sure sitting where you are, you're wrestling with, we're coming back to church, we see the community that we want this to be. What does God have for us in this next season? Whether it's coming tonight to the prayer time, whether it's just carving out a regular time in your schedule where we heard you kick the kids out the door and you're able to sit down and read and intentionally pray, maybe take time to pray. And pray through how God's worked in the past and ask that he would continue that trajectory in the future. Remember what I said when I started. I said that we don't tend to appreciate our memories. We don't tend to appreciate the experiences that God's given us until we realize we're at risk of losing them. Now, churches can get dementia as well. Okay? Not just individuals. If stories aren't passed from one generation to another, you lose them. How many people before today had no idea that there were names written underneath these stairs? Yeah. Hands went up, and it's all generations of hands that went up. But if those stories aren't passed on, one day these are just stairs with carpet. And yet, God has us on a trajectory, and often we figure out where he's taking us by looking backward at where we've been. And so just as Joshua encouraged the people of Israel, I want to finish with just challenging everyone here. In these next weeks and months, take time to remember, not just that God is sovereign, take time to remember the times where he's stopped rivers in your life. Take time to remember when he's created dry ground for you. Take time to remember those places where you went from seeing or knowing him to actually seeing him and him being real. Let me go ahead and pray for you. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you for this community, Lord. I thank you for the blessing that it's been for me to be able to see some of their history, to see how you've taken times where they've had plenty, you've taken times where they've had tremendous need, how you've responded to the hearts of people here to follow you, and how you've used this church not only to draw people into relationship with you, you've used it to reach out to other generations. You've challenged them to give up things where they've been comfortable, to step into uncomfortable spaces, to make sacrifices, also that others know you. And we pray, Lord, that as they step into this new beginning, this new season in front of the church, that the memories of what you've done in the past would give them confidence to step into the unknown and to expect to see you. We pray this in your name. Amen.